Good evening, and thanks for joining tonight's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments, where tonight we're going to take a look at the paradox of a pair of dates. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus near Pittsburgh, where I use TI Technology to make tough-to-teach, tough-to-learn concepts accessible to all my students. And tonight we're really lucky to be joined by our panelist, Mark Garneau. Mark is a helping teacher for the Surrey School District in British Columbia, supporting teachers for mathematics and numeracy in grades K through 12. A TCube National Instructor, Mark's been involved for many years as a tech author for many of the math-inspired activities, many of which I've used in my classroom and with other teachers, in which capacity he has developed many tips and tricks for creating interactive documents. In addition to promoting the effective use of technology in mathematics, Mark focuses many of his workshops on assessment and the power of visualization for developing concepts. Mark, it's great to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Mike. Thank you. That was a very good introduction. Thank you. Great to see so many people here.
I agree. And Mark, you're on a roll. While you discuss our agenda for tonight?
All right. Well, the welcome and introductions, check. We're done. We're 1/5 of the way there. We're actually going to explore the birthday problem by starting with a simpler problem, namely dealing with birth months. Then we'll do that through some different representations, trying to harness the power of technology. Then we'll shift over into the birthday paradox problem, and then close off by looking at some extensions and where else we could take it before finally at the end there is the exciting drawing, if you stick it out, a drawing for a TI graphing calculator of your choice, should you be the lucky winner.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free to send Mark any questions using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. And we'll also be using that chat window tonight to send general messages. As a reminder, the session is being recorded, and we'll provide a link to the certificate of attendance at the conclusion of the webinar. All right, Mark, you have control. Feel free to share your screen.
I have control.
Let's get this started.
Okay. All right, and I will do my best to try to keep track of the Q&A and chat. I'll pop back in and see the things that come up as we go along, but let's get started. Okay, there we are. All right, I see a nice interface. I get to see the things that are coming up. All right, good evening, everyone. And yes, I'm very excited to see so many people here. And let's just get right rolling with it. By the way, this TNS document, I'm using TI-Nspire tonight. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing, some of it certainly we could do on a TI-84, but TI-Nspire is my happy place, my comfort place when using TI technology. So that's what I'll be using. At the end of the session, I will share a link, and that link will give you a copy of this TNS file, as well as a page of just, I think it's about 3 links on there of just some other information about the birthday paradox. So the title that Mike showed and the title of the webinar was like, does someone share your birthday? And then it said the paradox of a pair of dates. Well, the title I submitted, I think, unless I wasn't thinking, is just the paradox of a pair of dates. But it didn't have the word birthday in it, so I can see why they added that other piece. But this is not a problem about in a room, what is the probability that someone shares your birthday? Because actually that's much simpler to determine, and it's not as interesting as the common birthday paradox problem. So that's the one that we're going to be starting off with and exploring. And so the way that problem goes, stop that, there we go, is in a set of n randomly selected people, what is the probability that at least 2 people share the same birthday? So that's the commonly phrased way of exploring the birthday paradox or problem. A lot of people say, well, it's not really a paradox, but paradox kind of has some very broad meaning, so I think it still kind of fits. It's just when there's something unexpected or contrary to what you were expecting. The more specific problem that often gets asked is, what is the smallest value? So what is the fewest number of people that it takes before the probability is at least 50% that there is a match of at least two birthday or people who have the same birthday. So I would love, I'd love to be doing this face to face. We could do a little turn and talk so we could talk about what are the assumptions that we are making. But given this format, I'll just jump right into it. I think the biggest assumption is that we are assuming a uniform distribution of birthdays, that any one day of the year is just as likely as another day for people to have a birthday, which in reality is not quite true, depending upon certain times of the year, the amount of births rise for certain reasons that happened 9 months earlier, whatever might happen, and the reasons for those. So they're not uniformly distributed, but for the mathematical purity of this problem, we will assume that every birthday is equally likely. All right. So what? I can see the chat, but I can't see the Q&A, so I'm just making sure I can bring that up. There we go. Oh, it's just a bunch of hellos so far. Okay. I will do my best to answer any questions as they come up. So feel free to post in one of those two places. It looks like I can see them now. All right. So again, this would be a great time to, in person, turn and talk. What do you think? This is the part that that makes this problem interesting, because when we figure out what the answer is, it's kind of shocking. It's kind of shocking. So I put this page in the document here. Not that we're actually going to answer it right now or share answers to that, but I do encourage you, especially if you don't know the answer, if maybe you haven't explored this problem before, to think about what is how many people do you think it takes for there to be a greater than 50% chance that two people share the same birthday? Oh, thank you, John, for bringing up a where is the group? Where is the group can mean something, can make for, that's a good assumption. So we're going to assume that wherever we are, whatever the context, the birthdays are uniformly distributed. Okay. So I know when I first heard this problem, I was thinking, gosh, it has to be at least 100 people. And thank you, Ezra, for sharing an idea. So in order to, in the past, especially my early years with teaching, I might have explored this problem and just kind of jumped right into a theoretical solution. Let's look at it this way, and um, just start doing the theoretical calculation. And I think that's really a missed opportunity. I want my students to kind of feel the problem, especially with the randomness of it, which is a big part of exploring probability problems. I want them to get a taste of it, and so I'd much rather do some kind of exploration. So I like doing the birthday month because they could actually simulate it even without technology. Get some 12-sided dice and roll two of them, or just keep rolling 12-sided dice until, and keep track of what you get each time until you get a match, and that's how many people it took to get the same birthday month for that one trial. Or you could use a 6-sided dice, or two 6-sided dice, and roll those and look at the. I guess you couldn't look at the sum anyway, because then you'd have two. Anyway, there are ways to simulate it. You can use spinners, uh, but what the technology offers us here, by way of simulation, is we're able to get that same feel for the problem without having to gather materials, without having to keep track and record. The technology itself can do a lot of this for us. So we're going to do a couple of different simulations, and just a reminder, this has to do with what about the probability that two people share the same birthday month? For example, two people both born in February. So this first simulation, what's going to happen? There's an N slider and an R slider, and so I'll just show you what this will look like in a moment. I've included in this document, just in case you decide to share pages of this with your students, a rand seed command, because if all the calculators are starting fresh and everybody starts using random number generators, then they'll get the same results because of a default seed. And so I always like to put in, and there's ways to do it through programming, but I like to just put it in a math box here, change the number. I often say the last 4 digits of your phone number. If I wanted to be, I could say, just put your PIN number there. Uh, not a good idea as a choice of a random seed. But that way, when people start doing a simulation, they get some different results. All right, so this first simulation, here's what it looks like. As you can see along the bottom, there are the 12 months, and we have an N slider, and that has to do with how many people. So right now, there's one person in the room, and they were born in February. So as I click the number, so if I click N here, it goes up to 2 people. And I keep going until there's a match. So far we have January, February, and April. Oh, there we go. So it only took 4 people in the room before I got a match. Notice that if I click to the left, it still goes up, because I could add some more trickery and make it so that I can only click forward, but that's for a whole other workshop on doing that level of trickery. But anyway, we know that it was at 4 dots when we stopped. So now I'm going to reset and do it again. How many does it take until we get a repeat? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 8. That time it took 8 people. So I'll reset again. Reset, I can use either left or right. And I'll just do one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that took 6. So what do we have? 4, 8, and 6. And so by doing that a few times, students get a feel for, after they have that, what does your intuition kind of tell you? What do you feel would be the right number? I think a lot of kids would say maybe 7, because that's one more than half of the number of months. But the simulation starts to help getting a feel of, like right now, so far my samples tend to go to that higher number, but I just did 3 simulations in a classroom, when many people are doing it. And with Navigator, if we try to capture some of those things, enter the number or capture the number of trials it took each time, then we'd start to see it. So, but instead of using Navigator and all of that to do it, I'm going to run a second simulation, which will keep track of the number of trials. But before I do, I thought there may be some people in the audience who are wondering, how did he do this? How did he create this? Because I'm making use of some I'm up to my old tricks with what I'm doing here. So I thought it'd be worthwhile kind of showing a little bit under the hood of what's going on. And even if it's not one of the people watching tonight, then maybe it's somebody's watching a recording of this who would have some interest in that. Okay, so um, the first thing is, what's happening here is that there is a program running in the background. That's how I'm able to do this simulation on a data and statistics page, generate data um, using the sliders, or clickers as I call them. And there's a program running in the background, but it's hard to see where that program is, because in order for a program to run in the background, it has to run in a math box on a notes page. And so what I usually do is, when I have a notes page, here it is, you'll notice the split screen. And so I just tuck another notes page under here, and here's the math box. And the program that it's running is called Birthday Month 1, and that's because I have 2 different programs in this first problem. So that's running there, and then I just neatly tuck it away, kind of out of view, just because otherwise it just gets cluttered. I don't want a student to, delete the part of the program from running. But the cool thing about a program running in a math box is that, unlike on a calculator page, the program only runs when I tell it to run. In a math box, it can get triggered automatically as long as there's a variable in the program which changes. So in this simulation here, N is a variable in the program, so every time I click N, the program runs, and that's how it's able to generate a new data point. When I click R, the program runs, and that's why, or because R is a variable in the program runs. So notice the difference though. What N does is it generates the new data point. Okay. Boy, this is amazing that it's taking so many. Look at that. 7, 8, 9. Took 9. Wow. So the N variable controls how many people are in the room. But when I click R, notice that right now it says R equals 1. There are 9 points and N equals 9. As soon as I click R to the left or to the right, I'm back down to my starting place. All my data is cleared except for the first value in a new simulation. N is back to 1 and R is still at 1, even though I clicked it. So how is that happening? Well, I've left the page of the program in here. And if you end up sharing this document with your students, you don't need it there. You can actually, boop, delete it. And because the program is itself a variable within that problem of the document, it's still there. It's not lost. I'm going to undo. And go back to the program. Okay, I realize. Thank you for somebody who answered that chat question. Okay. All right, so just quickly go through some of the elements of the program. This first part is sort of my big trick of that I've used so many times in my creation of documents, and that is to create a reset clicker. And that's what that R clicker does. So here's the logic. That clicker uses the variable R, and it's set between 0 and 2 with an increment of 1. Doesn't, I mean, I could, anyway, that's the way it's set up. So if R is not equal to 1, it's because I've clicked to the right to make it 2, or I've clicked to the left to make it 0. So as soon as I click the R clicker, the BM list is birth month list, not bowel movement list. That's a different problem. We're exploring the birth month problem. So the birth month list gets set to no data. The value of N, the number of people in the room, gets set back to 1, and the value of R gets set back to 1. So that's why I can keep clicking the R slider, and it keeps going back to 1. But that's what sets everything back to the beginning. There's just one line of code in the actual simulation. So what this means here, this augment is another built-in function that I've used a lot. And what all it means is add a list to an existing list. And I can add many elements at the same time. But in this particular simulation, I'm just adding one thing. So I have my birth month list every time. So this program runs every time N gets clicked because N is a variable in the program. And when it does that, it generates a new random integer from 1 to 12. Notice that it's in those braces to make it a list element, and it just adds that onto the list. So when I start, there's a single value generated in the birth month list. When I click N, it adds another value, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so that's the program, and that's the sort of the thinking behind it. And we're going to revisit this program when we extend to the full year of birthdays. So let's take a look at the second simulation. And the way this one works is rather than generating the number of people each time, that's effective. Like I say, I want my students to get a kind of a taste for how this problem feels. But in this one, it goes through a whole trial. So in the background, it keeps adding people until it finds a match. And then it keeps track of how many people in the room did it take before that match is to happen. So for example, at this starting place, it's starting with, it ran a simulation and it took 7 people before a match was found. So I'm going to do another trial. That time it took 4. Then it took 4 again. Took 7 again. 3, and so on. And I can just keep adding some more. This vertical line here, when I click on it, it's a plotted value. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing the mean of what I'm calling N list, which is my list of how many people in the room did it take to find a match. So far we have that list consists of 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 7, and 7. And so far the mean is around 4.5. So I'm actually going to reset the data and start over. And let's just watch this vertical line. When I click the slider, the value will disappear, but let's just see where it goes, because that'll give us a feel for, what is the sort of middle place of the expected number of people in the room to find a match. So I'll just go through a few times. Notice how as I go through more trials, the variability in that mean value gets less and less. Okay, and that's another important idea of probability. That law of large numbers. The more simulations you do, the more closer the experimental can get to the theoretical. Can N-list be more than 10? Yes, it can. In fact, maybe because I just set up this window, 8, 9, 10. So let's go to, I have the chat in the way of my thing here. Let's just go to the window settings. Oh, I set it to 11. Let's go all the way up to 12. There we go. So yes, it can. It's just so far, after 76 trials, it never took that many. But theoretically, it's possible. I think I've limited the slider to 100 because I'm already getting a good idea of here. So right now, for this 100 trials, the mean was 4.74. And as more, different students try this in the class, they're all going to get values that are kind of close to that. And so this kind of paints us a picture of, there's something special around that number of 5. So just a quick thing about, I'm not going to go through as much detail about this one, except to say I had a challenge. I had a challenge to think about um, how am I going to keep track? How am I going to have a program identify when there's a match? Because in that first program, it's creating the list. It could be like a list, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4. Oh, there's a repeat. And so I have a list of the numbers between 1 and 12. But then, from a programming perspective, I'd have to look through the list and check for each number and see if it happens more than once. So what's the frequency of 1 appearing? What's the frequency of 2 appearing? What's the frequency of 3 appearing? And that is just a lot of looping to get through. So I took a different approach. So what I did was I made a list from instead of from 1 to 12, I just made a list of 12 elements where each one is set to 0. So the first element 0, so they're all 0, 0, 0, 0. And every time the result comes in, it replaces that 0 with a 1. And then the next time that number shows up, it always adds 1 each time. So let's say the month number is 7 or no, the month number is 7 for July. As soon as July shows up, that 0 turns into a 1. The next time July shows up, that 7 changes to a 2. So what it's doing each time is it's looking through the list and looking for any 2s. As soon as it sees a 2, it knows that there's a repeat, and then it stops. So here's what that part of the code looks like. So first of all, here's my birth month list and I'm just setting it up as a sequence where every element has a value of 0. So normally in a sequence thing, you have some function of the variable, the I, but in this case, I just want it to fill 0 from the elements of 1 to 12. Then there's the reset. And so here we go. So I generate a random number from 1 to 12. I go to that element in the list. So if it generated a 4, it goes to the 4th element of that birth month list and adds 1 to that number. So what this is saying, if I got a 4, if b equals 4, it goes to the 4th element, and if it's a 0, it changes it to a 1. If it's a 1, it changes it to a 2. Okay? The COUNTIF then looks through that birth month list and looks for an element that's greater than 1. I could have just said 2, but I like to kind of cover myself just as I'm coding to make sure it'll work, that so that it goes something over 1. So I could have changed that question mark greater than 1 into just a 2. Look for a 2. If it finds, so COUNTIF returns the number of times in a list something is shown to be true. And so at the beginning, um, the COUNTIF of a number greater than 1 is 0, because they're all zeros. And then some ones start to come in. And as soon as there's a 2, then the COUNTIF of how many 2s are in this list is now greater than 0, because there's one of them. So I could have put equals 1 again here as well instead of greater than 0. But again, I like to kind of cover myself just in case something weird happens. Then it just captures that. So I take my N list, the number of people that are captured for each trial, and the same familiar augment. But this time, what I'm adding there is the sum of my birth month list, because my birth month list then will, so let me just throw in a calculator page here just so we can see what I mean here. So let's say, so I had my 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so let's say as it's doing its simulation, it gets that one, then it gets that month, then it gets this month, then it gets this month, and then, oh, this one gets a repeat. So how many people are in there altogether? Well, I have 1, 2, 4, 5 altogether. So just by adding up that list, it gives me the number of people that were in the room when a match was found. Okay? I realize for some this is like, oh, it's making my head hurt. But you'll have the doc. I'm trying to just do a little bit here so that when you look at the document later, I encourage you to try to make sense of it, because when I do probability, I love doing simulations. Again, so that students get a feel of the problem, and the technology is so powerful for being able to make these simulations possible in a very quick but still effective way. So I mentioned that mean number seems to be around 5. And so with my class, I'd have a conversation, turn and talk. Why does that number make sense? Why around 5? Just to kind of jump to it in the interest of our time. If you think about, we're looking for a matching pair. And so in a group of 5 people, there are 5 choose to 10 different pairs of people that could possibly share a birth month, and we only need one of those to match. So 10 different pairs of people, 12 possible months, it feels pretty likely that you're going to get a match somewhere in there. Now, sometimes it takes more than 5. Sometimes it can be done in fewer. But the fact that with 5 people, you get 10 different pairs of people kind of intuitively feels like, yeah, I kind of see why that's the expected value. Let's explore this problem theoretically, because that's going to then help us make sense of the full year of birthdays. So what we've done so far, we've done a couple of simulations. We've had visual representation through dot plots, 2 different kinds of dot plots. One that was tracking the birth months, the other one tracking the number of people it took to get a match. So one of the reasons why I love this problem is that it seems like, if you just try to think, if I were trying to figure out if there's a birthday match, and there's 20 people in the room, that's a lot of comparing to do. And there's a lot of things to think about, but 20 people if it were during the birthday thing, not the birth month thing. But using the complement is very powerful in many probability problems. And so rather than calculating, because like to get at least one pair of matches means, is there one pair of matches? Are there two pairs, three pairs, four pairs? Are there three who share the same birth month? Are there five who share the same birth month? All of those are possibilities. And we could figure out for a given group size the sum of all of those different probabilities. Way too much work. Because to get at least one pair, all we have to do is the complement, which is the probability that no one shares a birth month. Because that is the one event that is mutually exclusive from at least one that does share. So all those other possible scenarios, more than one pair that match or three that match, all of those are mutually exclusive to no one shares a birth month. So complement is a powerful idea, concept in doing probability. So let's look at the complement. What is the probability that no one shares a birth month? So I'm just going to give you a moment to look at this statement and see if you can make sense of what's going on. Okay, so the 12 out of 12, the first person, what's the probability of having one of the birth months? 12 out of 12. We want the next person to have a different birth month. There are 11 possible months left out of the 12. Third person, there are now 10 possible months left out of the 12. And we keep going for the number of people in the room. And so this is just a generalization of that statement. And I know it looks a little strange, that 13 minus n, but that's because it's the difference of counting from 0 versus counting from 1. If you look at the difference between two numbers is b minus a plus 1. That's another connection here as well. Like if I look at number 10, 10 is the third person, but 10 is 3 away from 13, not from 12. 11 is 2 away from 13, not from 12. 12 is 1 away from 13, not from 12. So that's why it's 13 minus n. So we can carry this further in this. I'm jumping through the theoretical calculation here. What we notice in the denominator, we'll end up with 12 to the power of n, where n is the number of people in the room. On the top, we have the product of the numerators. But a way that you can always multiply, it's the fundamental counting principle of I think that's what it's called. It's been a while since I've done that. Where you're counting number of possible combinations. And so if you're doing something like 12 times 11 times 10 times 9, you can use factorial expressions to do it, but the NPR, the permutations, is a way of doing that. So like 12 times 11 times 10 is like 12p3. So the permutation formula gives us a short form for doing that multiplication of descending consecutive integers. So that's why we have 12pn and then over 12 to the power of n. So the final formula for the probability that there is a match is the complement. 1 minus the permutation of 12 to n over 12 to the power of n. Okay? So this is where I would have started before in my early years of teaching. Let's just get right into the theoretical probability. But then it just becomes this mundane exercise that for a lot of students won't make sense because there's a lot of symbolic magic happening here. And we don't really have a feel for the problem. We can't look at that formula and get a feel for, what's really happening with this is happening in this situation. So that's why this comes in after we've felt the problem, we've tasted and smelt that problem. Then we're ready to kind of bring in the theoretical to make sense of the experimental rather than after the fact. So what I've done is I've created a scatter plot of this relationship. And oh, look at that. There's a split page because I'm controlling a plot. Because rather than showing the whole graph at once, I wanted to control each point of that scatter plot with a clicker. So when there's one person in the room, the probability of there being a match is 0. As soon as 2 people go in the room, you can see it's just under 10%, I think. And what we're looking for, this blue line here, is the halfway point. So when do we hit 50% or more? There's 4 people in the room and then 5, boom. So once we have 5 people in the room, the probability is greater than 50%. And then as you get more and more, obviously, you get very close after 10 people. This is why we didn't see any numbers greater than 10. It's just so unlikely that it would take more than that, but it is theoretically possible. And obviously, once we hit to 12 people, the probability is 100% that there would be, actually, no, 13 people would make the probability 100%. I should actually have changed that slider to go up to 13. Anyway, that's something you can fix in the document on your own. Notice the shape of this curve, because that's going to lead to a problem near the end, and I'm going to have to speed up to get to it. Okay. Oh, finally, this last one, again, I'm looking at different representations and so on. What this one does is it allows us to see, so we saw it graphically, now this is numerically. I can go through and see, so there's when there's 5 people, it's almost a 62% chance that there'd be a match, and so on. And I should have let that slider go up to 13 so we can see the one. Why don't we just do this right now? Settings, we're going to go up to a max of 13, and boom, there. That's much more satisfying. All right, to the problem that we're here for. But all of that early stuff was just so that we can kind of simplify it so that we can get a better sense of what's really happening when we think about the birthdays over a 365-day year. So we can kind of go fairly quickly through these kinds of things now. Would you like to change your estimate? So either you know of this problem, you already know sort of what that number is, where that where you pass that 50% probability threshold. Now that we've done the birthday month, that led to that 50% threshold being in a group of 5 people out of 12. So yes, I think I initially overestimated. Yeah, I think that's what we would think. I think ask 100 people in the street and 99 of them are going to pick a fairly large number. And they will most certainly choose, yeah, exactly. And they'll almost certainly choose a number that is um, at least sort of half of the, like 180 or something, half the size of the number of days in a year, because that, you want to be sure, or they're feeling like, that's when I expect it to happen. But then we saw it, well, it was 5 out of 12, and that's less than half. Huh. But 5 out of 12 is still pretty close to half. So maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 is reasonable. Well, let us see. So rather than doing the first program, which would generate a point, each time a person comes in the room, that's a lot of clicking just for the sake of one trial. We're going to jump to the trial where it's running a full trial and then posting how many people it took. Um, so the way this program runs, notice it's exactly the same as the other one. All I did was change the 12 to a 365. So it's filling in a list of 365 elements where each element is 0. Then, as soon as a random number from 1 to 365 shows up, it adds 1 to that number. As soon as a 2 shows up, okay, greater than 1, then there is more than 0 twos, because there's one of them, and so it adds on and we build our list. By the way, I didn't even talk about the loop thing when I talked about the program um, the first time. Um, it's a little, I could have done like an if and if kind of thing, and then just like a label and then a go-to thing. But apparently that's just bad coding or bad programming to kind of do it that way. So loops are much better. The while loop, uh, always when it reaches that condition to stop, it always just does that extra little, does one more, and so yeah, I was getting results that were oftentimes one more than what it should have been. But the loop end loop works well for stopping it, allowing you to stop it once it's reached that situation, which in this case is a birthday match. Be very careful with loop end loops though. Um, that you have a definite thing that will happen for it to stop. Otherwise, it'll run for the rest of your life until you force quit the program from running. And there are key codes, like I think it's function 5 on a Mac, something like that. Maybe it's F1 that you have to press and hold for a while to get it to break. So always be careful when you're dealing with loops like that in coding. Anyway, because the number of people in the room, if I did a dot plot, there's so many possible numbers, and so dots which shouldn't be on top of each other end up showing up top of each other just because of the thickness of the dots. So that's why I went to a histogram instead. So this first value that's showing up here, it took 16 people before there was a match, which already is like, 16? There was a match after only 16? Wow, that must have been really, really lucky. Well, let's run some trials. And let's look at where this line starts to settle. Here we go. All these different things. It's building a histogram. It's going to keep going here. Look at that. It's barely moving now. It's kind of staying right around there. And I could keep going. I could raise the value of this slider and keep generating more data values. Look, sometimes it takes more, but even that, like here, I'm just going to see if I can get any of those to pop off the top of the screen. Yeah. So if I'm doing something like this, the dot plot adjusts the window height automatically. The scatter plot doesn't. So what I can do is in the menu and the window settings, I can zoom data and it'll fix my window so that the data shows up. So far, after 85 trials, the maximum was somewhere between, or twice out of 85 times did it take a group size between 53.5 and 58.5. Where's the mean here? Let's see. 23.2824. And notice now that I've done so many trials, it's barely moving. It's barely moving. I stopped it at 100, but I could keep going. So wow, that's why it's called the birthday paradox, because it's like, what? That is the opposite of what I thought would happen. That is not what I was expecting. It's counterintuitive. So hence the label of paradox for this problem. So before we get to that number, um, let's look at the graph of the probability. So what this is doing, this is actually calculating the theoretical probability. It's similar to what I did with the birth month problem. It's instead of using a clicker, I use the actual non-minimized slider because there's just a lot more numbers that I can go through. So as I go through to change the number of people, I can just use my arrow key and go up. There's that, see, that's that familiar sort of shape again. And there's the 50% threshold. I'm at 22 people. Boom, 23. It crosses that threshold. As soon as you have 23, the probability is greater than half that there'll be a birthday match in that room. Assuming neutral context, every birthday is equally likely, uh, which is shocking that the number is so low. And then we could go along and see where are people's estimates. Okay. Notice what happens once you get around even 50. Look how close to you're like in the high 90s, even after just 50 people. That is incredible. That this is what, when we think about randomness. Now that I'm in the 70s, it's basically indistinguishable from 100%, even though I won't get 100% exactly until we hit 366. So I let the slider go up to 365, even though I'm not letting the graph go up that high, just so that we can kind of get a feel of how little of the way towards 365 till we get to that 50% threshold. It's not kind of like a visual smack in the face of the counterintuitiveness of this problem. Notice what technology offers us here. We get a feel, we get a look, we get visual impact of the situation, which can do so much more than just raw numbers on a page or on a whiteboard. So, and it's interactive. I'm in control. The user is in control. Instead of me being just a receiver of information, I'm controlling the information I see. And that I think is really key for students really to feel like they're owning something, that they're making sense of something, or at least that they're experiencing something with this. All right, on to this is the numerical one. Again, I didn't go all the way up to 365, but just to confirm, when we get up to the 23, that's when we first see it cross the 50% threshold. Let's see when we hit, the other question was, when do we hit 99%? So let's see. Here we go. Right there. Only 57 people to hit 99%. And I think it's at 70. By only 70 people, you're at 99.9% chance. Even though I knew this, it still makes me smile because it's just not what's expected. All right, so I started talking about the use of technology there, and I just wanted again to highlight some of the things that we experienced. We experienced simulation, seeing the situation play out instead of just imagining it or having it verbalized. We're seeing an actual kind of simulation of the situation. We're able to see that graphically, statistically, numerically, and symbolically, and how these things are connected. And the students in control of what they experience. And there's opportunities. I'm not getting into the navigator aspects of this, but I could be putting in some of these prompts by way of questions, and I could get them to record their thoughts or ideas as they go through. I think I've kind of, the smile on my face says, why is this worth exploring? Because it's so unexpected. In the end, the theoretical calculation of it kind of makes sense pretty quickly, especially if you've been doing some probability calculations already, along with combinatorics and those kinds of things. but it's just how unexpected the results are that I think makes it worth exploring. The idea of using a complement is a really important idea as well in probability, and I think that makes it a valuable problem. So those are the two main things for me. Well, three, let's say. The use of a complement as a powerful tool of doing some probability situations. Um, what was my second one? I lost it. Oh, the counterintuitiveness of it, that it's not what's expected, and finally that there's so much joy in experiencing that and seeing it play out. All right, so I'm going to go very quickly because I need to pass it back to Mike in about 7 minutes or so. So I'll go a little bit quickly through these last sets of things, but again, you'll be able to have this document and see what's there. I call them sequels. If you're familiar with 3-act tasks, which I didn't play this out as a 3-act task, though I guess sort of there are elements of it there. But when you want to extend a problem to a 3-act task, it's called a sequel because it's based upon a movie. Anyway, won't get into all those details right now. I'm calling them sequels. One is that there's a we saw a little taste earlier when I did that 12 choose 2 or 10 choose 2 and no, 5 choose 2 in a group of 5 people. There are 10 possible combinations. So if you think about in that situation, what's the probability that all 10 of those possible combinations have a different birth month? It would have been 11 out of 12 with each pair. You know, that because it's the 12 out of 12 times 11 out of 12 for each pair that they are different. So in this situation, the 364 to 365 for each possible pair of people in that room. So this does not produce the precise calculation, but it gets very close. It gets very close. And so as we can see here with this, this way of expressing the formula, this is looking at how many different pairs of people are in the room. That once I hit the 23, it's just over 50%. And 22 is not. So it's a very similar situation. In fact, here's a comparison of the precise theoretical model to the approximate theoretical model. And ooh, that is so close. So close that we might consider that the approximation model is just fine. But the fact that it makes intuitive sense as well, I think is kind of cool. An extension. What if you want to do at least 3 people? And at first I thought, oh, that shouldn't be too hard. You know, if we've done at least 2, then now we just have to do at least 3. But then you start thinking about the complement, and oh, wow, it melts my brain. Because now I not only have to not count all different birthdays, I also have to not count that there's a matching pair and the rest different, or 2 matching pairs and the rest different, or 3 matching pairs and the rest different, or 4 matching pairs and the rest different. That's a lot of different things to get to, and that's just way too complex. So instead, I built a simulation. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of it here, but all I did was change that previous code, and instead of looking for an instance of 2 in my list, it looks for an instance of 3. What's the first time that one of the days of the year had came up 3 times? So I can run a simulation, and overall it settles in. I believe the theoretical probability for 3 when you expect it to be 50% is 88, and through this simulation it ended up being 83.4. But if we did more of them, I believe, if I remember correctly, that it's around 88, which is again surprising, like 3 matches after only 88. All right, final extension I think here. If people enter one at a time, which one is the most likely person to enter the room that will find a match? Is an interesting idea. And the way we can approach this one is by comparing what's the probability when this person enters the room compared to the probability for everybody else that's already in the room. So you're looking at what difference does it make when that person enters the room. So that ends up looking at what is the difference between the consecutive probabilities for people entering the room. So we can compare that person entering the room compared to what was it before that person entered into the room. And I believe the greatest, oh, there must be something not running, and I'm not going to take the time to fix it right now, but I'll fix it in your version to make sure that that runs. I don't know why it's, oh, I know, it's because I'm not executing these. Yes, oh, there we go. There we go. So I believe it's around 20 people, because look at those numbers, 0.31, 0.319, 0.322, 323, and then it goes down again. And that's because what it's doing there is looking at the rate of change of that graph. Remember that curved graph? So that sort of point of inflection in that situation, that's the sort of expected value of who's, not that it's very likely that they will be the one that matches. It's actually very unlikely that they would be the one that matches. But of all the people entering the room, that's the most likely person, the 20th person in the room. That's an interesting thing with probability as well. Sometimes the thing that is most likely in a situation is still hardly very likely. It's like rolling two sixes, or sorry, rolling a sum of 7 when rolling 2 dice. That's the most likely thing to happen, but it's not very likely to happen because of all the other possibilities being much greater. But it's still the most likely thing to happen. All right, there are some related problems which are really interesting. That's on a page of links. So this last page in the document, if you go to this bit.ly address, and the key part of a bit.ly here is the suffix. So I have capital B, capital D, lowercase mg 2022, or there's the picture there. And I believe that Mike will be sharing this to those who signed up. I will share the link. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Mike. I'm going to, I guess I should stop sharing and pass the control back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mark. So as promised, Mark said at the very beginning, hey, we're going to give away a graphing calculator to one lucky person, and I want to hold true to that. So our winner tonight is Sila Caputo. So congratulations. We will be in touch over email next couple of days to get some information from you. Most importantly, which graphing calculator you'd like to pick. So be thinking about that. And again, thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. To receive a certificate of attendance, go and click the link in the chat window. Also listed as link for the documents that I used and Mark used as well. I know Mark had shared his bit.ly a minute or so ago, and my link has his link as well as my documents as well. And if you're watching this on demand, go ahead and copy that link into your favorite browser to receive your certificate. And if for some reason these links aren't working, just hang tight. You'll automatically get a follow-up email in a couple of days. And in that follow-up email will contain a link to the recording, a link to the documents, and a link to the certificate. If there are any questions, especially about any of our products, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-TI-CARES, or send us an email, ti-cares@ti.com. Lastly, when you leave the webinar tonight, a brief survey will automatically appear in your browser. Your feedback really guides us as we plan future online events. So just something that Mark shared that you're like, hey, I'd like to see more of this. Or you have another idea that maybe Mark could put together for a future webinar, please share those thoughts in the post-webinar survey. We'd love to hear from you. So huge thanks to everyone who joined us tonight, and huge thanks to Mark for putting everything together tonight.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for coming. We had a huge crowd tonight. That was great. I wish we could have interacted some more, but hopefully we'll see you in person someday.
Thanks again, Mark, and thanks again for everyone for joining us. We hope to see you back online next week. Have a great night.